Well, good morning from Cottage Farmstead. If we haven't met before, I'm Rebecca, and it is a beautiful morning outside here in mid-June, and I thought I'd take you on a tour of our garden as things have started exploding out here the last few weeks that we've had some warmer weather with some consistent rain. We're already bringing in the harvest on several different crops, and the flowers are in full bloom in the urban flower terrace, so it's high time to take you around our garden again. So I'm out here early this morning as we are supposed to start getting consistent 90-degree plus weather this week. So I wanted to take advantage of the cool of the morning while the light was nice and golden before it gets too toasty out here and I need to head inside for the afternoon. So on the first step down from our front porch is more of our edible landscaping area. So in here we planted blueberries and raspberries. We also put in some flowers like hellebores. We put in a tea olive over there. We have plans for adding other ornamental and edible perennial crops, mostly shrubs, up in this terrace. The blueberries last year, I think we got like 3 blueberries. We were like cutting them in half to share. But this year the plants are actually doing really well, even though we didn't particularly baby them last year. We didn't even have irrigation set up for them. So they are doing quite well, and we have our first berry that is almost ripe. So hopefully we'll be able to taste that very soon. And we can't wait to harvest the rest of the berries, hopefully in a couple weeks. Then beside our porch over here, we have our raspberry plants. We planted 3 canes last year. 2 of them survived, and they have been doing fantastic this year. We also got a couple more canes. It looks like only one of them made it. I was trying to root a few more in the greenhouse, and a lot of those died off on me, unfortunately. They didn't fully take off. These plants have been producing about a cup a day or so, and the ones that we don't eat fresh, I've been freezing, and I've been slowly filling up a quart bag here and there, trying to get a little bit of this in the freezer for the winter ahead, or for potentially making a batch of jam. So after our edible landscaping terrace, you step down into our herb and flower garden, and as you can see, it is in full gorgeous bloom right now. We've been cutting lots of beautiful flowers off of them for the last couple weeks. The daylilies actually just started blooming this week, and I don't have any flowers on it right now, but the orange rose down here, I think it's the Lady of Chalet variety, has been producing beautiful orange flowers. The yarrow is just about finished. I have a few flowers coming along, but for the most part it has wrapped up as it usually blooms in the early spring for us. And then I have lots and lots of black-eyed Susans all over my garden that volunteered. I had 2 plants last year, and their seed just got spread everywhere, probably by the birds. And so I just let them sprout up wherever they decided to grow, and it's been fun to have that fill in different gaps in the garden that I had last year. So going along the front of the house here is our oregano plant. You saw me harvest this actually pretty heavy last month in a video. As you can see, it's already come back with a second flush and is already flowering. Since I've already preserved all the oregano that we need to eat, I've been using this in our cut flower arrangements as some greenery and filler. And it also makes the bouquet smell especially good. And like I said, I have black-eyed Susans everywhere. This is where the 2 original plants were on either side of the step down here. And these are probably the most mature looking plants that we have here, but it's been fun to have pops of yellow throughout the garden. Got some more oregano, and then our other daisy plant to keep a little bit of symmetry along our pathway. But then the current showstopper in the garden right now is our dahlias. So back in the early spring, I planted out some dahlia tubers out here. It was a mix of some that I had bought from Eden Brothers, as well as those that I had been gifted. This one right here, I believe, is Rip City from Eden Brothers. I also got their passion mix, which is a mix of orange and maroon and darker pink color ones that I think are just about to start blooming. I'm not sure entirely until these open up, but I also was gifted 2 tubers as well. One was a yellow centered, more of a peachy pink on the outside. The other was one of the more frilly types of dahlias in a similar color tone. I did have some of the tubers not come up, so I'm not sure who is who until the rest of them start blooming. But I have been enjoying these beautiful Rip City dahlias in bouquets in the house. They have a nice touch of drama to the bouquets. And like I had mentioned in last month's garden tour, I planted alyssum along the rock edges of our urban flower terrace to help fill in some of the gaps where I don't have perennials planted yet. Some of them have taken off, as you can see here. These will probably continue growing nicely all summer. Some of the other ones are dead. They didn't make it. We did have a very dry, hot week, and then we had a week that was like 4 inches of rain. So we do have some washout issues here, which does cause some problems when you're trying to get plants established. I'm excited to have quite a few of them survive despite the weather. And continuing along, I have more yarrow. It's also mostly spent. I've been harvesting the flowers. And then over here where I had my volunteer celosia, it's not doing the best this year. It should be much taller by now, especially since we've been watering it consistently. I've been harvesting a few of the little spike flowers here and there for some smaller bouquets that I put like in the bathrooms or on a bedside table. But I'm not sure this is going to be quite as showy as it was last year. And Farmer Nathan and I are both super excited about all of these grapes. Look at all of these clusters that we have on this plant. And as you can see, we're having some issues with our grapes and some of our other crops in our garden this year. The Japanese beetles have been a nuisance. They're leaving these lacy leaves behind in many of our plants, including our roses and some of our other garden plants. We have set out a trap for them, and we've been filling that up, and then Farmer Nathan's been coming out here a couple evenings a week and just knocking them off into a bucket to start trying to control the population just a little bit. As we continue walking beyond our grapes, we have some more of these black-eyed Susans. My rose bush here, I think this is a Hermione variety of David Austin roses. It's mostly wrapped up, it's blooming. It is suffering a little bit from the Japanese beetle invasion that we've had, but I don't see any on it this morning, so I think we might be getting ahead of them finally after a couple weeks of having hundreds of them out here. A little bit more alyssum. My rosemary continues to thrive. I've gotten 2 harvests off of it already to start preserving for our winter soups and roasts, and it still looks like it could use another haircut, so I might get a little bit more off of it later this week. Chamomile is coming along. I have just a few little plants that you see down there. Nothing is blooming yet, so we'll see if I get any flowers off of it this year or not. But I'm hopeful. I had a good harvest last year. It just took a little while as well. So hopefully it'll continue growing. I have another dahlia here that I'm still waiting to see what color it turns out to be, along with some bolting parsley. The next in line is the gaillardia plant that I planted here and on the other side. I cut the bloom that was on this plant earlier this week, so I'll have to see if I can insert a B-roll shot of it here. It is a very pretty flower. It's not quite as tall as I was expecting, but I'm curious to see if it bushes out a little bit more as the summer goes on. But it claims to like poor soil and drought conditions, which we do have in a plenty in a southeastern summer. And along the front edge, I have a dahlia tuber that didn't come up. I have my flag there. And then I have another small oregano plant. And then this area, I have a lot of volunteers. I have a volunteer feverfuse, a volunteer echinacea, a volunteer bachelor button, along with another gaillardia plant that I planted intentionally there. The echinacea plant that I planted last year has been doing really well, except the Japanese beetles are on it again. For some reason in echinacea, they don't eat the leaves so much as they eat the flowers. So they leave my flowers looking a bit rough for wear. It works for bouquets in the house, but it's not necessarily something that I would want to sell. So these have not been making it into the bouquets that have been selling on the Clemson Area Food Exchange. So last month, my lavender plants are in full bloom, as well as my oriental lilies. They're obviously past their prime. I did harvest most of the lavender off of these plants as a second flush in the fall as possible if you do that. So I got most of them off. I left a few on here as the pollinators were really loving these flowers, so I left some on here, but I'm hoping for another bloom this fall. Along this side, I do have a repeating pattern, so I have some more dahlias, and I'm still waiting to find out what color they are. Some more alyssum down here along the rock edge, and another couple gaillardia, but this one does have a bloom on it, so let me show you that. Still a fairly young flower at the moment, but as you can see, it has beautiful coloration. We have another rose plant as we walk along here. The first of my thyme plants, and then our big old marshmallow plant. We transplanted this last year and it grew really large, and it helped make our garden feel a little bit more established, and it has taken off again this year. It is beautiful with its little pale purple flowers. Unfortunately, the Japanese beetles are also enjoying it this year, so Farmer Nathan has also been coming through and knocking them off into a bucket. trying to get that population of Japanese beetles under control. So next to the marshmallow plant is where I have our little thyme patch. It looks pretty brown at the moment, but those are just the spent flowers. So I need to come through and give it a trim back to get another flush of growth this summer. Last year I struggled to keep most of these plants alive as the ants kept building big mounds around all of my thyme. I still have one anthill that I'm fighting down there, but I'm hoping I might be able to get a little bit of thyme harvested this year. Down the center of our urban flower terrace I have my annual flowers. In this patch I grew sunflowers last year. As you can see, I have some beautiful volunteers popping up. Underneath them are some very, very sad zinnias. We didn't re-amend the beds up here as well as we did down in the vegetable terrace. So these have really struggled, and we've had a lot of washout with some of the heavy spring rains that we've had. So I think my zinnias are going to be quite stunted. I'm hoping to take one of those far beds over there and build some raised bed edges to prevent some washout, to make it worthwhile to put compost in it, and try again on the zinnias, because we do have a long enough growing season that I probably have one more chance to get some zinnias going this year. So the center bed right here is an anything goes section this year. I had planted a lot of different annual flowers and not everything came up for me. So I didn't have enough for a solid patch, and so I just stuck all the different varieties that did germinate for me in this zone. It's been nice and colorful. Mostly white is blooming right now, but I do have some calendula starting to bloom. There's a few nasturtium blooms popping up here and there that we've been tossing on salads or selling in edible flower mixes. But it looks like a few other things are going to be starting to bloom soon, so hopefully next month this will be even more colorful. And lastly is my very scraggly snapdragon zone. I planted these snapdragons actually last year, and they bloomed gorgeous last summer, and they survived the winter, and they gave me a little bit of a show here in the early spring, but at this point I think I'm going to be ripping them out. And this is the bed that I'm thinking about putting a bit of a raised bed, at least on this side, so it doesn't continue washing out. Re-amend and try growing some more zinnias. And the zone with the most growth and change since last month's garden tour is our vegetable area, so let's go take a closer look. Our carrot patch is full and lush, which is nice as we don't have to weed it quite as much these days. Farmer Nathan has pulled up a few carrots here and there. They are still not quite large enough for a full harvest, so we probably have another month or so of them being in the ground. But the few that we have harvested have been fairly sweet compared to last year's very bitter carrots. So I'm hopeful that this variety of carrots this year will be tasting a whole lot better. And in the next row over is our cutting celery, which is just about tall enough to start cutting and drying and getting it preserved in our spice cabinet for winter soups and stocks. Despite all odds, my pumpkin on a stick plants have actually survived. They were attacked really hard by the potato beetles earlier in the season, and then there's also Japanese beetles on them right now, but they have started blooming, so I may yet get some fruit off of them. I'm hoping they produce at least enough for me to collect seed and try again another year if they don't produce a ton of fruit. In the far back of this row are a few basil plants that we have tucked in. They were the old ones that we had growing in our basement over the winter, and they have been bolting ever since we planted them out here, so we've been trying to keep up on the harvest so that they quit bolting on us, but they may not thrive for us this year. We'll get what harvest we can off of them for drying and putting in our pantry, but I don't think they're going to be quite as lush and bushy as they were last year. This next bed has been going great. I still have chard growing well in here. The different plants that are bolting in here are just about to be pulled out. The lettuces, I have a couple of the chard that are bolting over there, and then I had a kale plant I think Nathan's already pulled out that was bolting. So as things start bolting, we're going to start pulling them out because we do have interplanted in here our okra plants. We want them to get maximum heat and sunlight so they can continue growing, hopefully a little bit larger. I'm already starting to see fruit on them, like this one right here is already starting to flower. So we may end up with some very stunted okra plants this year. When I was going through our freezer inventory though, I had a ton of okra left over from last year, so even if these don't do well, I still have some okra put up. And in our next row here, we have our kohlrabi, and they are at full maturity, as you can see there. We've been tossing them into our menu the last couple of weeks, but I still have quite a ways to go to finish eating all of these before it's time to pull them out. So in this next zone, the first two rows are our peppers for the summer. I do have some sunflowers planted along the edge for a little bit of color, And then we did have kale interplanted in this row right here that I have harvested off of, and I've gotten as much as I need in the freezer for the winter. So those will start coming out as they are starting to bolt on us as well. Again, this year, our pepper plants are staying really small and fairly stunted looking. I'm starting to suspect that it might be our wind pattern here. As we planted these at the same time as our tomatoes that you're about to see, our tomatoes are already up to my chest in many instances. And these guys, in the same conditions, same soil mending, everything, are just not growing quite as tall. But we do have very gusty winds here. We actually had a breeze just start right now. So pretty much every afternoon we have a gusty period of the day, and I think that is keeping some of our plants shorter than I'm used to. We've talked about planting maybe a windbreak along each side of the garden to see if that helps protect our garden a little bit more, as the wind also dries out our garden soil pretty quickly too. Either way though, these plants are still doing really well. They're healthy and they're actually starting to produce fruit. There's little bell peppers all along this row, and there's blossoms on the next row. So it looks like we're still going to get a decent harvest even with tiny little plants. Then the next two sections in this zone are our summer squash and our cucumbers. Summer squash, we had some washout with one of our heavy spring rains that took out a couple of my plants. Two of the plants, especially one of the ones behind that bolting lettuce over there, are doing pretty well. This front one looks kind of scraggly, but it's been the first one to bloom. We do have issues with squash bugs and vine borers, so it's only a matter of time, we know, before these are going to be taken out. But we usually hope for a couple of harvests before the bugs get to them. And then our cucumbers are doing fantastic. We got our first harvest on Monday of this past week, so today is Wednesday, so just a couple days ago. And we've already gotten 4 pounds off of these plants. We love this variety. It's called Homemade Pickles, and it stays very small, compact, bushy. You could probably grow it in a pot really, really easily as it doesn't take over. But as you can see, it is loaded with flowers. So we should have a good cucumber harvest for fresh eating and pickle making this year. So our next zone are our tomatoes and tomatillos, and these plants are loaded. We don't have any of them ripening just yet, but they are so full of fruit that I'm going to be busy very, very soon. I was actually counting my canning jars down the basement. I need to go pick up a few more boxes as I would like to try a few different canning recipes this year. We have a lot more beefsteak tomatoes in the garden this year than I have grown in the last couple of years. And I'd like to try making my own tomato juice, as we like using that in bases for soups in the winter. And I also like to make my own marinara pizza sauce. Typically, I just can a whole bunch of generic tomato sauce and then repurpose it in different ways. But since I have so much fruit on the vine this year, I thought it might be fun to experiment with a few new recipes and see if we have any new favorites. So some of the varieties that we're growing this year are yellow pear, we have black krim, I have orange icicle, San Marzano. We have 2 new varieties that I'm testing out called Prairie Fire and Hungarian Heart that my mother-in-law gave me. I also have some Eigelhart cherry tomatoes, which is one of my favorite orange heirloom cherry tomatoes. And I might be forgetting a couple more that I threw in here, but we have Amish paste. That's another one that we have growing in there this year. But every single plant is healthy, doing well, no blight. Last year we had some nutritional deficiencies, but this year, after emitting the soil with a little bit more compost, they're doing great. So hidden behind the tomatoes are our tomatillo plants. They yet to remain proven. They are loaded with fruit, which usually happens every year for us at tomatillos. But I'm curious to see if they're going to produce early enough to not be loaded with the bugs. Last 2 years that I have grown tomatillos, I have not been able to put up a single jar of green salsa because every single one is rotten before I can even harvest it. This is a hybrid variety that I'm giving a chance in our garden to see if it manages to beat the bugs. So it might be something I will have to buy seed for every year, even though I prefer heirlooms or open pollinated varieties. With our bug situation here in the southeast, I might have to commit to hybrids, so we'll see if this variety proves itself. And this tangled mess is our cantaloupes and watermelons, and they are doing fantastic. We actually have a few cantaloupe, let's see if I can find one here for you, that are getting pretty close to maturity. I mean, look at the size of that one already. So it won't be too long before we start getting fruit off of them. The watermelons are a little bit further behind as we planted those directly from seed. We had a few volunteers of the cantaloupe, so they're ahead by a week or two. But we are looking forward to having some fresh melons out of the garden very soon. In the next row, I have a experimental squash that we're growing this year. This is the trombone zucchini. We do have issues with vine borers, and I had heard that this one has less issues with vine borers, but from looking at it the last couple days, I'm starting to wonder if it has gotten some sort of vine borer after all, or some other pest is starting to attack it as it's starting to turn yellow. It looks very wilted in the afternoon, and I'm afraid I'm going to find it dead very soon. We did harvest our first zucchini off of it the other day, and there's a few more on there, but you can see they're just not thriving for me. I've got end rot. Even the one I harvested was a little squishy on the ends. I'm not sure why this plant is struggling so much. So alongside our experimental squash are our butterfly peas. We planted the first round back in late April, and we planted a few more recently in between because these were not growing quite as fast, so we were curious to see if a few more would help fill it in. We are starting to get our first few flowers. I mean, look at that beautiful blossom right there. For the most part, I grow these flowers because they're beautiful. They are edible, so we also sell a lot of the flowers to local chefs. I'm not sure why Lucas over there is going crazy, but he is crowing up a storm. Where was I? So most of these flowers we end up selling to chefs. They're quite a specialty flower. They can actually help color some of your drinks, and they're just very beautiful on the plate. So it is a nice way for us to earn a little bit of money from our garden. Usually some of these edible flowers and the excess produce that we have in our garden help pay for our seed money for our garden next year. We're not selling a ton out of here, but it's enough to offset the costs of us growing the garden. And this lush section are our green beans. We've talked about how much we love the Provider variety of green bean, and it is living up to its name yet again this year. I think this is our third or fourth year growing them. We've already gotten our first harvest off of it, and I preserved about half of what I wanted to for the entire year in one harvest. And we have tons more coming. You can see it's blossoming. It's full of more beans that we're going to need to harvest in the next day or two. So as soon as we get as much as we need in our freezer, we'll be selling these to some of the CSAs through Farmer Nathan's Growing Green Family Farm CSA, and possibly sending a few to the farmer's market if we have extra. Then in this zone is where we planted our strawberries and asparagus. The strawberries are doing really great. They've mostly wrapped up their blossoming and fruiting, but they stuck out a ton of runners. So we've been trying to train them back into the bed so this can be nice and full of strawberries in next spring. Then the asparagus have been doing their thing. We did not harvest any asparagus to eat this year since we just transplanted these from pots. But a few of them are actually getting ready to go to flower, so I might be able to collect a little bit of seed to plant more crayons out next year. Last but not least is our crop garden section of the vegetable terrace. Our popcorn is doing great. It has just started tasseling this week, so we expect to start seeing some corn popping out very soon. Like I said earlier, these plants have been very short compared to popcorn we've grown in the past, but it's probably a good thing with the kind of winds that we do have here in the afternoons. And some of these possibly have a little bit of nutrient deficiency as well, as this was some compost that wasn't the greatest quality. We have put down some pelleted chicken manure, which has helped green up the plants, but they're definitely staying on the smaller side. To my right is our squash and sweet potato zone. Behind it I planted, I believe, my spaghetti and old yuxie squash seed, and they came up. One of the mounds got totally washed out with one of our heavy rains that we had, like 4 inches in less than 18 hours. Got totally washed away when it was young. So I planted some sweet potato slips that I had left over in some of the gaps, so those will start filling out. The one squash that is doing excellent this year is the one that died on me the first last year, and that was our Cushaw variety. You can see we have a few baby squash already forming here. Get rid of that grass. But we are having to fight squash bugs. You see those right there? Those are their eggs. We've been swiping those off every time we see them, then killing the adults as I come along, as they will wipe out your crop super quick if you're not careful. Oh, look, we have a mating pair right there on the leaf. So let me get those off and crush them. Another sneaky adult one right there. Get a hold of him. Smush him. And this section is where we had our 3 rows of potatoes. We have dug up 2 plants here and 1 plant in that row. This was 2 different seed potato varieties that we're reusing. And the tubers out of this one are fantastic. And as you can see, the plants are dying off, which it is prime time for us to start harvesting them. We're hopefully going to be harvesting most of these tomorrow evening, if it doesn't rain on us. And this other row over here, they didn't have as fantastic of tubers. We weren't expecting as much out of them. They were the scraggly ones that I harvested from our garden last year that didn't do great. And the seed potatoes also didn't do fantastic. They were eaten the most by the potato beetle compared to their companions next door. And they just never thrived like these front plant rows did. So those are mostly going to be probably new potato size, and then these are going to be the ones that we end up storing in our basement. And our last vegetable garden section is just starting to fill in. We planted sweet potato slips on each side here, so those will start filling in throughout the summer. We have some volunteer amaranth and sunflowers that we just leave for fun. And then in the back, I have some more winter squash. I think those might be my pumpkins. I'm not sure. I haven't seen any fruit just yet. They are also struggling with what oddly appears to be vine borer. Vine borer doesn't usually attack your winter squashes. We've already had to pull one out that died just like a summer squash would, and it's very suspicious. So we're hoping that we can get some squash growing here, but that's usually something that we fight when we try to grow squash in our region, is the bugs. So I think I forgot to walk over here last month. But this is our onion and our garlic patch. This is where we had our very first garden when we were building our farmhouse back in 2022. And we've continued to keep the soil up. It does get very weedy as we don't come out here and manage the weeds quite as much. 2 weeks ago, we harvested 3 rows of onions. Some of them have been curing on the back porch, and then I also chopped up about a dozen bags to have them pre-diced in the freezer, as that's my favorite way to preserve them, as it makes cooking in the kitchen so much quicker and easier. We still have our garlic out here. It's probably about time. They're mostly turning yellow. I checked a few 2 weeks ago when I was pulling them up, and they were still on the small side. The ones that were further along were larger, so I figured I'd give them another week or 2. But probably this coming weekend, I'm going to be pulling the garlic out and getting that cured and ready to store. We do have some T-posts around this garden, as we would like to put a deer fence up. I had the idea this past spring that since I wanted some more sunflowers, is to put a deer fence around this because the deer love eating the sunflowers. And then plant, as I pull out the onions and garlic, different successions of sunflowers and maybe some zinnias over here to have some late summer, early fall flowers that I can look out at from our master bedroom window, which is right behind me over there. Well, I hope you enjoyed a tour around our mid-June garden and seeing everything we have growing despite the numerous pests that we have here in the southeast. I hope your gardens are growing great as well, and I'll see you next month for another garden tour.